Okay, welcome to this week's worth of material. This will build on what we have before. It's very closely linked to the worksheet. I've tried to give more written content in the worksheet. So let's just get started. One of the critical concepts, and perhaps a diagram is the best way to illustrate this, that if you think of an object in this way, what we tend to do is we tend to think of the data as a compartment within that object. It's normally declared at the top of the object, but it has no direct access to the world. The object itself, so if you consider over here, this is your main, for example, right? And you write, you cannot directly access the object, the data in the object. What happens is that the data interacts with methods, so they go back and forth with the data, and to get access to the data you have to go through the methods to get to the data. This is probably the only critical concept, but it is so significant. It underpins the whole of the material that we are teaching. So let's just reiterate it. What we do is we place our data inside an object. It is then not accessible, even when we create this object, directly from a main. So if you did your new word, you created your object, you still couldn't get access to that. The way that we do it is we hide it with the word private. But what we define is an interface to the data. And that interface is a collection of methods, and we use the word public with those words. And so when we create our object in our main, we can then do, so if you do this, for example, let's say that I have a class, I'll just pinch an example from the code I'm going to write. Say my class is int array, and I create my object, I call it IA, and I use new int array, and I create it. If I do IA dot, when I press that dot, it lists here all the available public methods, including ways of accessing the data, doing analysis of the data, and so on. So I never in this list want to see that data visible when I do the name of my object and I press the dot in there in that code. So there's a new keyword, etc. So let's get on and just work through a couple of very, very introductory concepts. There are two basic ways that you access, well, there's several ways. But one of the mechanisms of accessing your data are what we call get and set methods. Get and set methods are best illustrated with examples. A get method, for example, if I have a get method here, this would be my way of asking the get method. The method would return whatever relevant piece of data back to my user here. That's how I would use a get. If I had a set method, I would pass from my main, my client, some data as a parameter, and it would update my data in this way. The get and set methods are typically the way that you will interact, one mechanism of interacting with your data. A second mechanism was hinted at in a previous lecture. It's tied to this bracket here. This line of code connects to a particular type of method inside an object called a constructor. And the constructor is best seen from examples, but you can read the lecture notes because they have a nice sort of break apart of how it works. The constructor receives initial data and sets up an initial state for the data. And that's typically what the constructor does. So we have get, set methods and constructor. Please look at the lecture notes if you want to see what the code might look like. And what we're going to do is I'm going to skip past those, suggest that you glance through it. I'm going to go straight to page 4 where we have a worked example. Now in the worked example, let's just spell out the worked example so you can see what I'm up to. In the worked example, I'm going back to week 3 So if you haven't studied week 3 or you skipped the array, this was all about a concept called an array. They are quite fiddly, quite complex. They have lots of different mechanisms you have to write for them. We are not doing array lists. So if you suddenly stumble into an array list, you cannot use the inbuilt array list. It completely undermines what we're trying to do here. So basically, what we're going to do is code from week 3 the array, then we're going to shift the array into an object, and then we're going to shift the code into methods for the object, and then we're going to do what we did with the array. So we're going to start with week 3's code, and then we're going to move it inside. I'll stop this video just because this is more theoretical and introductory, and in the next one we'll get on with the worked example.